In a world where every bit of news seems to come at us in text alerts, screenshots, and 90-second reels, it can feel hard to really engage with a story and tangle with all its messy edges. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do this podcast, to take the time to slow down and really dig in. Well, Tyler Mahan Coe really knows about digging in. Episodes of his podcast, Cocaine Rhinestones, regularly clock in just under 3 hours. There are sidebars within the sidebars. And it's a fascinating, deep exploration of a subject that truly deserves it, the history of country music. Tyler has adapted Season 2 of Cocaine Rhinestones into a book that chronicles the life and turbulent times of two icons, George Jones and Tammy Wynette. And believe me, you will learn something. I'm Demetria Kaladimos. It's Banner & Company. What was the first seemingly outrageous story you heard about a country star? Do you recall? I mean, you must have been hearing this around you in your environment growing up. Hey, so-and-so did this, or did you ever hear the time so-and-so did that?
Well, yeah, and then a lot of them, there's no way to verify it, so I wouldn't want to repeat any specific instances other than to say I think everyone who's been paying attention to country music lore for a long time knows there are a lot of outlandish stories featuring Mel Tillis and Roger Miller. Again, nothing I would ever say into a microphone because You just can't confirm it, but those would be the first ones that come to mind.
Yeah, I'm curious. That was my next question. What is your process for weeding urban legend from truth and reality? What's the threshold? How many people say it, whether you find documentation? I mean, not everything's written down.
Well, first of all, I try to keep in mind how much something has to do with the artist's career and work. So if it's just a story about a relationship, a romantic relationship that they were in that went bad, and it really has no bearing on, it's none of my business, you know?
Yeah.
Then I don't feel the need to address that. And there's a lot of stuff, like every artist that I've talked about on the podcast so far, there are a lot of stories that I come across, and they, are confirmed. They're printed in quote unquote news outlets. And I would be within my rights to discuss them, but I just don't see any reason to. It's interpersonal drama. It's family drama. But then when you come to someone like George Jones and Tammy Wynette, they are selling their relationship to you. So at that point, that is part of the story. It's like they're singing about their relationship. Okay, well, what was really going on there? And then that's where you get into looking at how much of this is a product and the economical philosophy behind that. Like, why are these stories that they're packaging for us the stories they think we want to know versus the stories of what was actually happening?
Was it good for you to have a couple seasons of the podcast and that voluminous amount of work done before you did, a book?
It is, well, yes. The book is an adaptation of the second season. So right. My naive thinking was that I had done most of the work required to put a book out, and I had no idea. So it really, I mean, yes, if I had just signed up to do a book from the gate or from out of the gate while trying to do all this other stuff, I probably would have had a mental breakdown. But just making the podcast is a lot of work. So I have been used to doing a lot of work, and I am my own boss. So when that is the case, you have to be the reason why you're doing the thing. There's no external factor that is pushing you behind you. So I think the podcasts caused me to be good at forcing myself forward. And I think that helped a lot in doing all of the unexpected work for the book, yes.
Yeah, the first season of Cocaine Rhinestones, I mean, you basically hit it out of the park. as an unknown rookie in the world of podcasting, bam, the thing takes off. Or did it? Do we not know all the struggles behind that?
Oh, it took off instantly.
Why do you think?
I think podcasts are the medium of podcast, I think, is very interesting. And I think there are a lot of parallels to why fans form such a strong bond with a musical artist. And I think it has something to do with the sense of hearing, the way that works. You can lay down with your eyes closed and listen to something.
Right.
And I think that in itself is such a closer bond than you can have. You cannot watch a movie with your eyes closed. You could, but you're going to be missing a lot of it, And also just talking, like people are just listening to me talk. So there is a thing that happens where if someone happens to recognize me in public, they'll come up and I can tell that they feel like they're talking to someone they are friends with because they have spent hours listening to me talk. And that's great because what they're listening to me talk about is something that's really important to me, So they do know me in a lot of ways that you wouldn't necessarily know someone who maybe is in a band, And then less, I guess, emotionally, this was a hole that wasn't being filled. Like there was not someone doing this, and there was a need for someone to do this, which is why I started doing it. So I think if someone else had started doing this, I myself, as a fan of country music, would have been thrilled for it to come out. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of other people like me who were thrilled that someone finally started doing this.
I'm curious, did you have the whole season mapped out, knowing, you've got some amazing stories, but knowing how it was going to be ordered and what you were going to do next, or was it kind of free form?
I had a plan, and I think it's important to have a plan, and I think it's also important to, especially if you're working in nonfiction, it's really important to be willing to take a different route in order to mostly enact the plan. So when I started, I thought that the Spade Cooley episode would be the first one, so that's the first one that I made. And that was a business decision because I was aware that quote-unquote murder podcasts are a very popular genre of podcast. But then once I got into that whole story and figured out the way that it needed to be told, I realized that if I came out of the gate with this as the first episode, it would be horrific and traumatizing, but also not a good representation of what everything I wanted to do is, So that was going to be the first episode. I made it the third episode and then replaced that with the Ernest Hub episode. And then when I decided to start working on the podcast, I knew roughly what the first 5 seasons should look like. And so everything that happens in season 1 happens because I know that I'm going to do George Jones and Tammy Wynette next. So if you go back and listen to everything in season 1, there's a direct connection. Every episode has a direct connection to what is eventually going to happen in season 2.
And again, you're your own boss, so no one's telling you, cut this, change that. That's got to be incredibly freeing.
And they would tell me to
Certainly,
cut that
yeah.
and change that. Yes.
So much is digitized, but I'm picturing you sitting on the floor amid stacks somewhere, going through actual paper, touching it.
So sometimes I do have to sit down and by hand write out sort of a diagram of, because there's all these like intersecting storylines and themes that are coming in and out of the story. And so I will sometimes sit down and do like a time travel movie diagram of how the timelines all play out. And then, and I keep these sometimes where I'll have like 30 different versions of it where I'll just have to start over and make another one when there's a change because I'm not doing it on a computer, which would be the smarter way to do it.
Yeah, but there's something about visually putting it out. I use bulletin boards still. I'm so old school, tax and index cards and stuff. But sometimes just looking at the landscape of where you are helps to focus your story.
Yeah, I want to do that. I am in a fairly small apartment for all of the work that I have to accomplish in it, but that is a goal of mine someday. I have this dream of basically painting a master timeline on all the walls of a room, and then so I can just add to it as I get to stuff. Because especially when you're trying to nail down trends and present them to people, trends in country music, trends in pop culture, trends in politics, all of these things, like, you really need to just see it all happening at the same time, some representation or diagram of it all happening at the same time. And then you're like, oh, yeah, that's why everyone started singing about bombs in country songs that year, you know?
What's the sharpest 90 or 180 turn you've done? The story's going one way, and then it's like, ooh, let's talk about, England. Let's talk about bullfighting. Let's talk about whatever.
Well, so much like the size of the book, all of those tangential sidebars happen very organically for me.
Your thought process.
Yes, and I have a lot of note files on various topics that I know will need to come into the show at some point. So
you're looking for the place to...
Right. Bullfighting was one of them. You do not get to... The show is called Cocaine and Rhinestones. You do not get to the modern concept of a rhinestone suit without the influence of bullfighting fashion. That's just purely a fashion thing. So that is directly a part of country music history. You're going to have to talk about that at some point. I didn't know when, and another thing that I knew I was going to have to talk about was the Protestant Reformation, just because a lot of the influence of gospel music, and especially what we think of in America as gospel music, and then secular music, it's all sort of tied to the Protestant Reformation, Martin Luther specifically. So these were things that I knew I was going to have to talk about. And as I was researching season 2, bullfighting imagery kept coming up. Tammy Wynette refers to herself as a Taurus and says that telling her no was like waving a red flag in front of a bull. George Jones has paintings of bullfighters in his bedroom, and Tammy Wynette talks about seeing them on the walls of his bedroom the first night that she's there. There are many other instances of that. So I'm thinking, okay, I guess bullfighting might need to happen right now. And then once I started looking into bullfighting, it turns out that it's a much more recent phenomenon than most folks would probably assume. And that it also connects to the Protestant Reformation directly. So it's all of these things, they sort of come organically as a result of trying to figure out why these things happen. And then for me, it's just a matter of finding a way to present them to people in a way that hopefully makes it pretty clear why I'm doing this. But then there are also more allegorical reasons for doing it. There are, and I spell some of them out, but I would prefer to not, because in my experience, people internalize things a lot better when they get there themselves.
It's Banner and Company. I'm Demetria Kaladimos. We'll be right back.
It's Croctober, the official celebration of Crocs fans like you. So whether you like to rock your classic clogs, get cozy and fuss-lined, personalize with your favorite Jibbitz charms, or even, dress up like a clog for Halloween, it's time to tell your story and share your style. Join the Croctober celebration with Crocs fans around the world. Go to crocs.com to discover the range of shoes and find a pair that's iconic like you. Crocs, celebrating you all month long.
Let's talk about the book. It is doorstop sized. Did you know it was going to be that thick? But in a great way. And the chapters, in my opinion, aren't too long. It's a great pick up, put down, review, revisit book.
Yeah, I am aware that this is a large book. However, my personal taste in books runs big. Like, some of my favorite books are gigantic. I enjoy Infinite Jest, which is a joke to many people that this book is just this monster and who would want to read that. I want to read it. Underworld by Don DeLillo is one of the best books I've ever read. And my thinking is, I'm never enjoying something and thinking, damn, I wish there was less of this,
Right.
It's, if you like it, then here's a lot of it. And I also certainly didn't decide I'm going to write a big book and then figure out how to fill all of this space that I arbitrarily chose. It's as big as it needs to be, to get everything done. I think of myself as more of a researcher and editor than a writer. I have a couple tricks up my sleeve as a writer, and I think I know when to pull them out. But I know that I am a good editor, and I know what needs to be cut and like what doesn't actually need to be here. So when it came time to turn the podcast into a book, there was a lot of stuff that instantly I knew that doesn't need to be here, that doesn't need to be here. And we can really focus on the George Jones and Tammy Wynette aspect of everything.
Are you okay with reading an excerpt?
If you would like me to.
I love the way you write about the fact that they were not a dream duet.
Okay.
Behind the mic.
With several years of experience performing duets in concert by this point, one would expect Tammy and George to be pretty good at singing together. One would be wrong. They excelled in showcasing the energy of their relationship's honeymoon phase, allowing audiences the opportunity to watch two newlywed stars adore and/or goof off with each other on stage. As for the actual singing, they were great at taking turns on the microphone while trading verses, but when it came time to sync up their phrasing and harmonize on a chorus, things often went poorly. While George's range and versatility did place him in an entirely separate class of vocalist from Tammy, most of their struggles with performing duets were a result of his tendency to never sing a song the same way twice. The very thing that made him so effective as an artist, his willingness and ability to entirely give himself over to an emotional connection with a song, meant the specific way he may phrase a lyric or lend emphasis to certain words was as unpredictable as any given person's day-to-day changes in mood. Similarly adventurous vocal partners in his past, Johnny Paycheck, Melba Montgomery, Gene Pitney, were only successful because of their ability to jump on George's wavelength and follow him wherever he took a song. Conversely, Tammy Wynette was the kind of vocalist who tried her best to sing a song exactly the same way every time. No matter how often she said their voices blended together as if by magic from the very beginning, she was not the kind of singer who could easily harmonize with George Jones on the fly and was regularly frustrated in her attempts to do so. Video clips of their live performances together gain a comedic twist once you learn to recognize how hard they're trying to sync up. Taking turns staring at each other's lips and radically lowering the volume of their voices to pull back after small mistakes. Tammy often breaks into a smile whenever she's able to successfully guess what Jones will do and match him. Billy Sherrill clocked this reality right away in their first studio session, and for the rest of his life consistently spoke of how bad it was for his liver's health to try recording George and Tammy singing together. How it upped his scotch intake and drove all three of them nuts.
That is so perceptive. I mean, I don't think I'll ever watch them, on video or film again, singing together without looking for that.
We did a presentation at the Country Music Hall of Fame and Museum, and part of it was multimedia, so they were showing video clips, and at one point they showed a clip of George and Tammy singing on a TV show together, and Allison Moore hosted the conversation part of it, and while that video clip was playing, Allison, who's also an artist for anyone who doesn't know, Alice and I both just busted up laughing. You could just see them trying so hard, and then Tammy jerking her head back from the microphone when she realizes that she's getting off from George a little bit. It is really funny.
So is it the naivete of the audience to not pick up on that, or do they just want them to sound great together?
I think both. It's and they sound pretty good. It's not like it's terrible or anything. It's just it's not the thing that it gets called all the time of they were the best ever. It's okay, maybe on an album when they could control all of the variables, but performing live, there's a million considerations that you have to factor in.
Yep. Let's talk a little bit about the illustrations in the book and Wayne White. Did I hear this right, that he was just he was a fan and he was doodling some of the imagery that you would, or some of the stories you would tell on the podcast and just started posting them?
Well, he is a fan of country music, lifelong fan of country music. And he did start drawing, not necessarily the artist in the episode that he was listening to, but it's my understanding that while he was just drawing whatever artist he wanted to draw, he was listening to the podcast. And yeah, he just started uploading them on Instagram with the hashtag Cocaine Rhinestones, which...
What a gift.
Yeah, I was just like, okay, this is amazing. And I, of course, was familiar with his work from Pee-wee's Playhouse, but I did not know that he could draw that way. I had no clue. And so once he started doing that, that put us in touch with each other. And I can't remember exactly which order these things happened in, but I went to his studio when I was out in LA and got to visit with him for a day. He would do showings in Nashville and I would go to the gallery, and getting to see, he has a I would call it a surrealist approach to at least the work that he does with country artists. The techniques are often associated with the surrealist movement in art. And if it sounds like I know what I'm talking about, I don't. But that's what I think of when I see it. And just seeing that stuff in person, the way he is able to apply pen to paper, literally do a bunch of scribbling, and then at the end come out with a marvelously detailed image of a person. It's magic to me. I think he's a genius.
Was that going to be the plan, that you would put visuals in? I mean, photographs almost seem boring.
I don't like the way that photographs get worked into books in a lot of cases. So I knew I wanted a visual to go with each chapter at the beginning. But then the problem that you have is I can go get the rights to print photographs, but it's the same photographs that have been in every book. And then there are not photographs for the chapters that take place, several hundred years ago in Europe. I don't have pictures of Catherine de Medici. So then you're not going to have a unified aesthetic running through the book. So you need someone to create original art. The issue that I have with a lot of photographs of country artists is they're staged.
Headshots.
There are teams of people organizing the way this person looks in this picture. So you look at most pictures of George Jones on his album covers, he looks flawless, like iconic. The clothes are perfect. His hair is perfect. But in what's happening inside, you do not see in the photograph. And Wayne's work gives us references to these famous images that we have, but I think it's a much more honest representation of what was going on inside these people in those scenarios.
It's Banner and Company. My guest is Tyler Mahan Coe, host of the podcast Cocaine Rhinestones, and author of the new book adapting Season 2. We'll be right back.
Let me introduce you to Mr. Shelby Single.
Hi, Herbie. How are you?
Well, what do? Do you write and sing or what?
I brought up 15 songs. I was hoping to get somebody to listen to them.
Yeah,
if I could set up and play, I would, just over there somewhere to be fine.
Okay.
That way.
Okay, let's try it. Let's try it and see.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I pull my car up here?
No. Leave it where it's at because the ground's soft here.
Oh, okay.
Okay?
Do you often get people like that coming up here?
Yeah, most of the time I don't listen to them.
Really? Why?
I just don't have time. It's, I would say probably 1,000 a week come through Nashville looking for recording contracts.
Herbert, what's your last name?
Howell,
And where did you drive from?
Augusta, Georgia.
Why did you want to come to Nashville?
Well, this is something I've always wanted to do, and I've always put it off, and I felt like that if I was ever going to do it, then now was the time. Here we go with one call, Come and Stay With Me. Come and stay with me till the morning sun shines its light on us and finds that we are one. Come and stay with me, darling, one more time. Give me a memory when you leave.
You have the determination you want to be a star.
Right. In other words, I'm not going to give up. I'm going to work at it, and I'm going to be that, even if it takes 15 years.
Well, why don't you do this? Why don't you come by our office tomorrow, and then we'll sit down and talk to you further about this.
Okay.
See if we can develop something.
Okay.
About noon tomorrow, okay?
12? Okay.
Right, okay?
That was from the 1972 documentary The Nashville Sound, not to be confused with the book of the same name. In that clip, you heard producer Shelby Singleton asking a young hopeful named Herbie to come by his office the next day. What you couldn't see is at one point during Herbie's audition, Shelby gets this kind of grin on his face and then turns to whisper something to another guy sitting next to him. Okay, Tyler, I'm no A&R person, but I don't know, I'm not hearing a ton of potential there.
Shelby Singleton signs him, I assume, not because he sees some talent, but he sees that this person is in this documentary. So if Shelby Singleton signs this guy, Shelby and this guy are both going to get a big part in this documentary. And of course, nothing ever ends up happening with that young man's career. But that's the way that he would make decisions, you know. And then Shelby is also a big character in Paul Hemphill's The Nashville Sound. Paul Hemphill comes to town. He's trying to figure out what's going on. And here's Shelby Singleton, and he will tell you that he is the reason all these things are happening.
I'm glad you brought up Total Unknowns. And I realize that your gig is history and what has legitimately happened. But there are a lot of these obscure, never heard again Herbies. I mean, do they fascinate you at all? Or is there just not enough material to flesh them out?
You couldn't do a whole story on someone like that because there's not a lot of documentation. But I think of the first person my mind goes to is someone like Glenn Sutton, like someone who was very important to everything that happened behind the scenes of Billy Sherrill's career, and then the artists that he worked with, like, and was married to, Lynn Anderson. And no one really knows much about Glenn Sutton outside of the obsessives, you know, the people who pore over liner notes like I have done my whole life. He's like probably the bottom threshold of someone who I could conceivably spend a lot of time talking about on the show, just because there is a lot there. He did a lot. He was involved in a lot. And there's a lot of stuff that's on the record.
What's next for you? I mean, how do you follow this?
Well, I'm very much looking forward to just getting back to making podcasts. I'm really glad that I have done this. I think it's important to do this. The response has been great. I am excited to really get back to completely focusing on that. And
can you tease a story?
Sure. So most of what's been discussed at length on the podcast has been Nashville Sound or later country music. And if it's someone earlier, it's been someone who like started earlier, and then how the Nashville Sound affected their career. And I think it would be interesting and instructive to go back further than that. I want to spend most of season 3 prior to the year 1950. And just because I think that there's a lot of arguments that were had around the Nashville Sound era and later that were being had much earlier. And I think that there's a lot that needs to be understood about the history of American music in general. The birth of what we call country music coincides with the birth of what we call pop music, or what we called pop music, the first wave of it. And it all kind of explodes out of this same moment that is not often directly confronted because of how difficult it is to have conversations, especially around matters of race. So like the birth of pop music is inseparable from blackface. And now if you were to ask most people what they think blackface minstrelsy was, they would probably tell you that it had much more to do with country music than pop music, but it really didn't, and it really wasn't even much of a Southern phenomenon. It happened up in the cities because it was presenting a grossly distorted caricature of black music from the South. And in the South, we had that music, so we didn't need a grossly distorted caricature of it.
Interesting. Yeah.
And not that like the whole thing is going to focus on that, but it needs to be talked about. It needs to be discussed. And also the music is fantastic, not the blackface minstrelsy stuff, but the early country records are very electric, and rock music was born out of country music. It was like a blending of old school country and old school R&B. And then also when you look into that, you see that the line separating those genres of music was not firm. It happened up in New York City. Someone in New York City decided that these need to be separate genres of music. Meanwhile, everyone in the South that was making this music, they didn't care. They didn't care if it was a white person or a black person making it, and they didn't care what someone in New York City decided it needed to be called. They just wanted to make good music. And in an interesting way, I think that country music seems to be getting back to that. For a long time, we have been subjected to very bad, financially motivated attempts to blend hip hop with pop country, and it's been awful until very recently. And what we're seeing now is artists coming from the R&B and hip hop side of things, adding country to their sound because they're a fan of it. Not maybe there is some consideration of this would be popular, make a lot of money, but you can tell that they like country music. I mean, specifically the Shaboozey album, which is like the most successful thing in the world right now. I think it's great. And I think we're finally getting to a point where these racial lines that seem to be so firm are seem to be going away. And I think it's a good time to talk about how those lines got put there in the first place, and maybe that will help more people decide to break them down.
All right, coming to Cocaine and Rhinestones, hopefully.
Yeah.
Very soon.
I don't know how soon. I'm still working on it.
Give him a couple of years, folks. He just finished a huge book. Banner and Company is a production of the New Nashville Banner. Our producers are Steve Harouche and Andrea Tudhope. Original music by Verlin Thompson. Subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or go to NashvilleBanner.com. You're in good company. We do a little thing here, Tyler, where our last question is in the fishbowl.
Oh, dear. I was wondering what this was.
Yeah, I know.
I've been
It's a little
staring at this the whole time. Okay.
So just pick
just
one
pick
and
one?
yeah, you never know what you might get.
Next question. From Ann Byrne, what is your favorite?
What is your favorite memory that involves food?
All right. Well, so at the age of 15, I went on tour with my father. I was in his band for like 12, 13 years, and there was not a lot of healthy food options. I mostly ate like chicken fingers for over a decade and fast food, and I had stomach aches every day, and I didn't even know that it was normal to not have a stomach ache every day. And then one time we had a bunch of shows, like a whole week of shows fall through. I can't remember why, but a whole week of shows got canceled. And we were out on the West Coast, which we didn't get out there very often because it was a far drive. We're, going everywhere by tour buses. And I've always liked sushi. I read the Shogun series by James Clavell when I was like 12 and had my mom take me to try sushi. Loved it. So I've always eaten sushi. But very American versions of sushi, like cream cheese and such. So because this week of shows got canceled, we didn't want to come all the way back to Missouri, which is where we were based out of. So we had like a week off, and a lot of the people in the crew gambled enough to where we could get like free rooms in Las Vegas, or cheap rooms at least. So we got rooms in Vegas, and I don't have a lot of money or anything, so I'm just mostly sitting in a hotel room, and one day I'm like, well, I could probably get some sushi here. And I don't know how I got this recommendation, but I got a recommendation for this like only 13 people can sit in their sushi bar. The soy sauce is aged. You're not allowed to touch it. They brush the appropriate amount onto your nigiri and serve it. You can only order omakase. There's like 2 different courses you can order. I'd never done anything like this in my entire life. And I had also never had a culinary experience like that ever. And it was so simple, like rice and fish, and every bite was just mind-blowing. Instantly transformed my idea of what food could be. So definitely that.